verse we're going to go to is Matthew 8, 1 through 3. And we're continuing our series tonight on Jesus, not religion. So far, we've talked about how Jesus was generous. We covered in great detail how Jesus was human, because those are things that we forget sometimes. We talked about how he was playful. We talked about how he was fiercely intentional. And last time, we talked about, if my memory works as well as I like to think it will, we talked about how Jesus was honest. Took me a minute. It was all still there. This week, we're talking about how Jesus was truly free, is truly free. He ain't dead. You see, now we live in the land of the free. I love living where we live. I love the country we live in. I love the state we live in. I love the county we live in. I love that we live out in the sticks because I can see the stars at night. And when I tell people in the city that, when I'm driving them around, they go, oh, because they don't get that. No, they don't. But freedom means different things to different people at different times. Because when you're a kid, freedom means doing things without the approval or need of parental involvement. You want to do things outside of parental supervision. In adulthood, I think freedom would be independent wealth and/or the ability to do what you want with your time. In either case, it means being unrestrained from doing, saying, or thinking the way that you want. That's what the Webster definition of freedom is. And Jesus provides freedom. But not always in the way we expect, and not always in ways, helps if I use my mouth right, in the ways that we're willing to do. See, after Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, you could say his star was rising. That was the first big public message that Jesus had made that we have recorded. He gives a detailed understanding of what living a life that pleases God looks like. And his ministry is growing, which means that he's being watched by the religious leaders of the time. So under that kind of scrutiny, under that kind of pressure, that constant observation, that celebrity, if you will, watch what Jesus does. In Matthew 8, 1 through 3, I like using the Amplified translation. It says, "When Jesus came down from the mountain, great throngs followed him. And behold, a leper came up to him, prostrating himself, worshipped him, saying, 'Lord, if you are willing, you are able to cleanse me by curing me.' And he reached out with his hand and touched him, saying, 'I'm willing, be cleansed by being cured.' And instantly his leprosy was cured and cleansed." Now, I think most of us know that story. We know about Jesus healing the lepers, but we don't understand how big a deal that was at the time. We don't have lepers roaming around. Not in this part of the world, not to my knowledge. Someone on the internet could, email and say, "You're wrong, they're over on 3rd Street. I don't know. But to my knowledge, it's not a problem that we encounter, so we don't know how big of a deal it is. So here's the analog. Put yourself back into the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And imagine that instead of a leper, it was someone with end-stage AIDS. People were terrified of AIDS when it first started because no one understood it. Because it was scary that it seemed like it could come from anywhere. And you didn't know you had it until you had it, and you had it for a really long time, and you'd suffer for a really long time, and you'd die. That was it. And a person in late stage AIDS, there were even stories where people, early in the AIDS epidemic, people wouldn't go to their dentist because they were afraid. And a person with late stage AIDS is emaciated. Their face is covered with ulcers. They're nearly bald, and they're wheezing on every breath. It is what walking death looks like to my eyes. Are you going to be okay back there? Okay. So with that knowledge, now we're going to go back and we're going to remember the Jewish attitude and the Jewish system towards an infected person. The rules given in the books of Moses were made to keep the Jewish people healthy, enabling them to live long and fruitful lives. And that was done by prohibiting contact with certain things. Or if you came into contact with something, you were considered unclean until the end of the day or the end of the week. And you had to go through these purification and cleansing ceremonies to be accepted back in. Otherwise, you were continually unclean, and they would kick you out, basically. In Leviticus 13, verses 45 and 46, it says, "And the leper's clothes shall be rent, and the hair of his head shall hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry, 'Unclean, unclean!' He shall remain unclean as long as the disease is in him. He is unclean. He shall live alone, and his dwelling shall be outside the camp." Being a leper was a life of ostracism. Torn clothes, dirty, messy hair, a bandana over your face to cover your mouth, and every time you go somewhere where other people are, you shout "unclean," so that they have the warning to get out of your way. Because if they touch you, they're unclean. If you were Jewish, getting too close to a leper could damage your reputation. And according to the law, it would make you ceremonially unclean until either the end of the day or a week. I didn't look that hard into it. But it did make you ceremonially unclean. So if you look, when the leper approaches Jesus in Matthew, he doesn't get too close. He lays himself out on the floor, prostrated. That means you're on your belly. And he was crying out to Jesus, if you, I know you can do this. If you're willing, cleanse me by curing me. His goal wasn't just to be cured, it was to be cleansed. It was to be let back into the camp. Because no one had touched him for however long he had been a leper. And we're not told how long he had been a leper. People were lepers for years and years and years. So now Jesus has a choice how to handle the decision. So what does he do? He reaches out and he touches the man. He didn't have to. The man had the faith. Jesus had the anointing. He could have said it's done, and it's done. But he knew what that man needed was a human touch. When the story is told in the book of Mark, chapter 1, verse 41, it says, "And being moved with pity and sympathy, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him and said to him, 'I am willing, be made clean.'" The man needed that human touch, like I said. But on the other hand, by Jesus giving him what his soul needed, not just what his body needed, Jesus had made himself unclean, which could be seen as a roadblock for his purpose. Earlier in Mark chapter 1, verse 38, it says, "And he said to them, 'Let us be going on to the neighboring country towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out.'" The way for us to understand what Jesus did by touching that leper is to put it in modern times. So here's the situation. Jesus just finished the Sermon on the Mount. I know I'm repeating myself a little bit. I see me do it a lot. It'll probably happen more. Thank you. But imagine this. What Jesus did is sort of like if we opened a new building. Big new building, fancy, clean, first time you're in it, so none of the kids have made a mess. None of the adults have made a mess. The carpet, isn't stomped down yet. And the sermon's done. And the sermon is exactly what God wants people to hear so that they choose to live a life of following him. And then it's sort of like if you went out from that message, you got fed, and it was amazing, and it was life-changing, and you go outside, and the preacher is leaned up against a pole outside the door, taking a drag on a cigarette, glugging out of a bottle of whiskey. That's kind of the equivalent of what Jesus did when he touched the leper. And he just doesn't care. Or rather, he only cares about the right things. He cares about the right things more. See, Jesus knows what he's doing. The Sermon on the Mount shifts the focus of righteousness from external to internal. It's more demanding than legalism, and it turns legalism over like a fruit cart in a stampede. And immediately after that, Jesus is willing to gamble his reputation. And as much as I would love to say that the church operates with the same freedom that Jesus does, I don't think I should lie to you. No, I shouldn't, so I'm not going to. Now, I've used this example before. If you think I'm wrong, you can go ahead. I'm going to make my point, and you can think I'm wrong. That's okay. If you think the church operates with that much freedom, I want you to think about the Western Protestant church's view on alcohol. I've used the argument before. I will use it again. Now, going into this, I do not have an issue with alcohol or alcoholism. It's not something I battle. I know some people have, some people still do. That's fine. It's just that's the easy example. So that's the one I'm going with. In Romans 14:21, Paul writes, the right thing, is to eat no meat or drink no wine at all or do anything else if it makes your brother stumble or hurts his conscience or offends or weakens him. And the church, especially the Protestant church, has taken this idea of Puritanism back to Leviticus. If Charity and I have someone over from the church for dinner, I have to be mindful of the fact, what? Legalism, yes, thank you. If Charity and I have someone from the church over for dinner, I have to be mindful of the fact that back by the knives on the counter, I have a decanter of whiskey. And some people will stumble seeing it back there on the counter. Not in a glass in my hand, where I'm about to enjoy it, but just having it there and having it out. Seeing it might make someone else stumble. And the lack of freedom that is so rampant in the church that a lot of the folks in ministry simply won't drink alcohol, not because they were alcoholics, but so they can avoid the judgment of others. Oh, well, that pastor shouldn't do that. Can you believe he talked about having alcohol in the kitchen? What's more, I talked about having alcohol in a glass on the way to my mouth, which is much how I prefer it in certain situations. Now, like I said, I don't have an issue with alcohol, but I have an issue with overeating. My normal joke is I didn't get this way from cutting back. And I am working on taking some rooms off the temple, but for the moment, it's still a problem. Now, what if I applied the same bondage to overeating that we apply to alcohol consumption? Right? I'd lose weight awful quick. And I'd hate myself for letting myself get to the place where I needed to lose this much weight. Because I'll be honest, folks, I could lose about half of me, and I'd be all right. Huh? Thank you, I try to be. My wife thinks so. That's the part I care about. If we applied that same bondage that we have about alcohol to overeating, or to drug use, or to adultery, or to homosexuality, or sex before marriage, can you imagine what the church would be like? It'd be a prison. You cannot. No. Nay, nay, child. Nay, nay, as one of my favorite comedians likes to say. There'd be more chains put back on Christians than Marley's ghost in the Dickens story. And you two are making yours yard by yard. I'm sorry, I like the show too much. It's a book first. Anyway. And this justified legalism has been going on now for thousands of years. And here's the difference. It's a difference between coercion and choice. You see, choosing not to drink, choosing not to overeat, is not the same as feeling like you can't. And God will never violate our free will. Ever. If he did, he would go against who he is, and the Bible says he can't do that. God is not a man that he should lie. He will never take away our ability to choose. So here's my question. Why are we taking that ability away? I try to ask those. I'm glad. Now, if we look at Jesus, he was never bound by those chains of legalism. Look at his conversation with the Samaritan woman in John 4. We're going to go to verses 3 through 9. It says, he left Judea and returned to Galilee. It was necessary for him to go through Samaria. And in doing so, he arrived at a Samaritan town called Sychar, near the tract of land that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, tired as he was from his journey, sat down to rest by the well. It was about the 6th hour, which is about noon. And presently, when a woman of Samaria came along to draw water, Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone off into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, and a woman, for a drink? For the Jews have nothing to do with the Samaritans. Now, we could go through this whole exchange. We're not going to. This is the part of it that serves our purposes, so that's where we stop. Now, in case you didn't know, or you're not up to date with, like 400 or 700 years of Jewish history before Jesus was born, the short of it is that the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along at all. If you want an idea of the animosity and the tension that existed between these two groups, think about a white KKK member and a black person in Mississippi in the 20s. It was not a good time. Now, by using that example, I'm not saying that one was right and one was wrong. That is not what I'm doing. But that's how charged the atmosphere was between those two. You see, a Jewish man would never talk to a Samaritan woman. And a rabbi would never, ever, 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 ever talk to a Samaritan woman. Let alone a woman like this woman, who we find out has what we would call a reputation. Jesus tells her she's gone through 5 husbands, and the dude she's shacked up with now, she ain't married to. She's got a reputation. She's known around town. But look how free Jesus is when he talks to her. He doesn't condemn her. He doesn't say anything wrong. He just says, hey, drink? And he's on the way to revealing himself to the first person who is not a disciple in his ministry. That's who God chose first. That's amazing to me. That staggers me. It's beautiful. God doesn't care about the religious aspects of it. God goes, no, you're going to tell her. And Jesus said, okay, I'm going to tell her. Now look at how Jesus dealt with the religious people of the day, because it's kind of fun. We're going to go back to Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. At that particular time, Jesus went through the fields of standing grain on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry, and they began to pick off the spikes of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "See there, your disciples are doing what is unlawful and not permitted on the Sabbath." And he said to them, "Have you not even read?" He's talking to the people who are supposed to know the Old Testament like the back of their hand. "Have you not even read what David did when he was hungry and those who accompanied him? He went to the house of God and ate the loaves of the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for the men who accompanied him, but for the priests only. Or have you never read the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple violate the sanctity of the Sabbath, breaking it, and yet are guiltless? But I tell you, something greater and more exalted and more majestic than the temple is here. And if you had known what this saying means, 'I desire mercy, readiness to help, to spare, to forgive,' rather than sacrifice and sacrificial victims, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Jesus' disciples are breaking the Sabbath without a care in the world when we read this. And Jesus just defends them. Now, by this point, the religious leaders see him as far too dangerous. And he is. Jesus is an outlaw, encouraging people to break the laws and the traditions that religion has taught them to hold so dear and to cling to so tightly. And if you want to understand why Jesus acts this way, we have to understand two key differences. The first is the difference between the laws of God and the laws of men. And the second is the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. See, here, another contrast for clarity. I have several cousins who attended Christian colleges. Two of them were at a college here in the state. And it was a college that specialized in having students leave with zero debt. Amazing in the modern age. The way they did this, the college did, was by requiring every student to work a job, usually on campus, year-round, that worked against their tuition cost. Okay? Now, these are part-time jobs. It's 15, 20, maybe 25 hours that these students are working. So let's split the difference. Let's call it 20 hours a week. And if you're now the common wisdom is, if you're in a college class, every 1 hour you spend in lecture every week, you are supposed to spend 3 hours studying somewhere else. So if you were a full-time student, which is normally 12 to 15 hours, that's anywhere between 48 and 60 hours of your week spent either in class or studying for class. And they were required to attend chapel, if I remember correctly, at least twice a week, because it was a Christian college. Sunday was kind of mandatory, and then they had other weeknight services that they could pick from. And they were encouraged to join other societies and committees on campus to strengthen their resume for whenever they left college. This is a 4-year institution. I know. But they're leaving out without owing any money. So go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 through 3. "And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And God blessed," which means spoke good of, "the seventh day, and set it apart as his own, and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all his work which he had created and done." The Sabbath was made for rest. And the Jews understand this. In Exodus chapter 34, verse 21, it says, 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even in plowing time and in harvest, you shall rest on the Sabbath. Short of it is, no matter what's going on, when the Sabbath rolls around, you take the day. You rest. And when Jesus explains how he has to explain to the Pharisees the Sabbath was made for man, not the other way around. You see, what he's telling them is that they've put the cart before the horse. So let's go back to my cousins at the college here in Missouri. Now, if they decided to skip Sunday service, they basically expelled themselves. It was a written agreement that they had to go, is my understanding. They could see this and tell me I'm wrong, in which case I'm wrong. But I believe that it was in a written agreement that they had to attend Sunday service. They would have been met with frowns and suspicions about their level of commitment if they had decided to skip. They were staying up late every night to get homework done. As I recall, they saw their family 3 or 4 weeks out of a year, except for the odd weekend when one side of them made a trip down, or up, as the case may be. And when the day of rest rolls around, they're given one more thing to do. The spirit of the law is being violated while pretending to be honored. But if you put the leaders of any religious institution, not just a Christian college, but if you put the leaders of any religious institution like this up to the wall and tried to ask them about it, they would have no shortage of rational reasons why they couldn't possibly afford to change the traditions and the habits of their esteemed institution. In my eloquent vernacular, that's crap. I heard a joke once that asked if you know why Baptists don't like to stand up. It's because you might think they're dancing. You know what's sad? Is that's funny. It's sad that that amount of legalism exists, and we recognize it and we can mock it. All good humor is based in truth. It's sad that that's true. What legalism like this does is it makes you focus on some trivial, petty rule-making. It makes you harden your heart toward God and stiffen your self-reliance and your self-righteousness. And to quote the late, great Sister Rosetta Tharpe, God don't like it. So let's go to Matthew chapter 15, verses 1 through 2. And then we're going to do 7 through 20. Then from Jerusalem came scribes and Pharisees and said, "Why do your disciples transgress and violate the rules handed down by the elders of the past? For they do not practice ceremonially washing their hands before they eat." Now here's another thing. You know, they were working on the Sabbath before, and now they're coming to the table with dirty hands. And Jesus' response is as kind and eloquent as he's ever been. "You pretenders, or hypocrites, admirably and truly did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'These people draw near to me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their hearts hold off and are far away from me. Uselessly do they worship me, for they teach as doctrines the commands of men.' And Jesus called the people to him and said to them, 'Listen and grasp and comprehend this. It is not what goes into the mouth of a man that makes him unclean and defiled, but what comes out of the mouth. This is what makes a man unclean and defiles him.' Then the disciples came and said to him, 'Do you know that the Pharisees were displeased and offended and indignant when they heard this saying?' He called them hypocrites to their face, and the disciples come up, 'You know you made them mad?'" God bless the patience. God bless the patience. And Jesus answered, verse 13, "Every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be torn up by the roots. Let them alone and disregard them. They are blind guides and teachers. And if a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall into a ditch." But Peter said to him, "Explain this proverb, this maxim to us." He said, again, the patience of Jesus is amazing. He said, "Are you also even yet dull and ignorant, without understanding and unable to put things together? Do you not see and understand that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the abdomen and so passes into the place where the discharges are deposited? But whatever comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and this is what makes a man unclean and defiles him. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, reasonings, and disputings and designs, such as murder, adultery, sexual vice, theft, false witnessing, slander, and irreverent speech. These are what make a man unclean and defile him. But eating with unwashed hands does not make him unclean or defile him. Do you get the picture what Jesus thinks about legalism? He's disgusted with it and with the people who push it. Blind guides and hypocrites. He tells them that the rules don't put a focus on holiness, which is what's supposed to happen, but they make people Pharisees, and they do it very well. The truer view of holiness Jesus gives focuses on the internal before the external. And the people, honestly, that this is going to hit the hardest are the people who work in the church. Because going back to the Sabbath, if your Sabbath day rolls around, every day is the Sabbath. You can choose your Sabbath day. If your Sabbath day rolls around and you're exhausted, you have done the Sabbath wrong. And if the reason you're exhausted is because you spent the whole time in church, you've really done it wrong. You're not resting. And the Sabbath is a day of rest. I myself carve out Saturday afternoon. That is my Sabbath. I am about as useful as a bump on a log on Saturday afternoons. The term we had for it growing up was you vegetate. Ask me no questions, expect nothing of me. I am here, and that is it. These are my 4 or 6 hours in the week where I have no expectations. I have no roles to fill. I have no part to play. I am resting. And those Saturday afternoons are precious to me. Because on Sunday morning, we're here. On Sunday afternoon, we're normally out doing stuff or doing chores around the house. None of that is bad, but it has to get done. And then I work my regular job Monday through Friday, and then I work a part-time job Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday after work, and then Saturday in the morning. I treasure my Saturday afternoon. I don't know when your Sabbath is, but you need it. God set the example that we need a time of rest. Because if you go too long and you go too hard, all you're going to do is burn yourself out. You need that time. I don't know who needs to hear this. If it's someone here in the sanctuary, someone who's watching online, you need that time of rest. Don't ignore it. Even if you have to, if you have to shut the door and tell your kids, I'm not here for 4 hours. Turn your phone off. I do not exist for 4 hours. I don't know what it looks like, but find a way to take that time. See, the freedom that Jesus offers, if you're exhausted on your Sabbath, especially if you're exhausted from church, it means you've broken the letter of the law as well as its spirit. You need your rest. Now, the freedom Jesus offers is difficult to teach and to live for many reasons, but the two big ones are, one, that it can be confused with hedonism, which is you live however the heck you want. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That is the tagline of hedonism. See, now but hedonism comes off as abrasive. It comes off as irreverent. It's unholy. And the freedom Jesus offers is none of those things. But if you take that freedom and you look at it, it's sort of like grace. When you get the pure grace message, it looks like a license to do whatever the heck you want to do. And God will let you do it. But if your heart's been changed, you don't want to. That's the difference. And the second issue with the freedom that Jesus offers is that it is frightening. People don't follow it out of simple fear. The fear of what other people think, or that it would lead them to fall into immorality. But the freedom that Jesus offers is based on the understanding of holiness that he's kept telling people about, the holiness that we've mentioned 2 or 3 times tonight. In Matthew 5:20, he says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness, your uprightness and right standing with God is more than that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." You got to be better than all those religious people who follow all the rules and judge all the people. You got to be more holy than them. The only way to have that righteousness and to have the freedom of Jesus is through a changed heart, a heart that's like Jesus's. We're going to do one last example. We're going to start in Luke 7:36, and we're going to take it in chunks all the way to verse 50. Start in 36 through 38. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to dine with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. I love the image of Jesus just sitting there sort of like in a lazy boy. I don't know if that's actually what it was, but that's what it is in my head. And behold, a woman of the town who was an especially wicked sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table of the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment or perfume. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. And she wiped them with the hair of her head and kissed his feet affectionately and anointed them with the ointment or the perfume. Now Jesus is no respecter of persons. This woman is beyond caring what other people think about her. Luke writes down that she is known as an especially wicked sinner. She got past caring a long time ago. And if you hadn't noticed from the examples we've pulled tonight, Jesus never really did care what other people think of him. He cared about doing what the Father sent him to do and doing it well. He cared about the people. I'm trying to use polite words because this is going on the internet. He could not have cared less what other people thought of him. So who gets upset about this intimate encounter if the people directly involved aren't upset? Well, the people who care about appearances. The people who care about what the good people will think. The people who operate in fear that they have masked as their faith. In Luke 7:39, now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would surely know who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a notorious sinner, a social outcast, devoted to sin." I don't know why I do the different voices. It's just a thing at this point. I'll take it. Now, this Pharisee is about as arrogant and self-righteous as he could possibly be. He's a sinner as much as this other woman is. Everyone in the room who's not Jesus is a sinner. So now Jesus gives him the answer he needs, and he gives it to him patiently. In 40 through 43, and Jesus, replying to him, said, "Simon," apparently that's the dude's name, "I have something to say to you." And he answered, "Teacher, say it." A certain lender of money at interest had 2 debtors. One owed him 500 denarii, and the other 50. When they had no means of paying, he freely forgave them both. Now which of them will love him more? And Simon answered, "The one, I take it, for whom he forgave and canceled more." And Jesus said to him, "You have decided correctly." See, now Jesus explains goodness in a way that the Pharisee has never seen before. All of the Pharisees' conception of goodness has to do with following the letter of the law. And Jesus tells him that's not what it is. So now, Jesus attends to the woman who is being stared at and whispered about for having acted so boldly and so bravely by coming in and doing what she's done. in verses 44 through 50. Then turning to the woman, he said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? When I came into your house, you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You give me no kiss, but she, from the moment I came in, has not ceased intermittently to kiss my feet tenderly and caressingly. You did not anoint my head with cheap, ordinary oil, but she has anointed my feet with costly, rare perfume. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, many as they are forgiven her, because she has loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little." And he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." And then those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" But Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go," or enter into peace, in freedom from all the distresses that are experienced as a result of sin. Now, if this doesn't make sense, I don't know how to explain Christian holiness to you. I don't think that you would understand it. I'm not trying to talk down to anyone, but I don't think you would understand it. And you wouldn't understand Jesus, and I don't think you would even want Christian holiness if this doesn't make sense. Jesus is free. Free from what the other people think. Any other people think. He's free from religion. He's free from false obligations. And it upsets the religious people who neither like nor understand him. They draw false conclusions. They point fingers and who knows what all else. And he's free from all of that too. Oh, that we would operate in that freedom. See, the more we get to know Jesus and the more we get to love him, the more we understand how deplorable false piety and shallow morality are. Just like how Jesus did. And how remarkable that makes Jesus. This freedom is one of the main reasons that Jesus was crucified. He was too dynamic for the religious people of the day to think that he was safe. But now, generations and generations of religious people who claim to follow Jesus have been muffling his freedom and chaining his followers in an atmosphere of tedium. And folks, that's not the way it's supposed to be. We aren't made to live that way. We aren't made to follow those rules and those regulations that tightly. Jesus came to give us freedom. It says in Isaiah that when he died on the cross, he paid the penalty for sin, sickness, spiritual death, poverty, and many, many other things. He freed us from those chains. He took that punishment for us. And now some people, thinking that it makes them a better Christian, have decided to take it back. Thank you. Yes, they are. But either through misunderstanding or a lack of teaching, we've come to praise it. I'm going to wind up stepping on some people's toes here, but that's okay. I've seen me do it before, and I'll see me do it again. Jesus didn't die for someone to take a vow of poverty. Jesus didn't die for people to be forced to follow traditions that are unbiblical. Jesus died to free us from the chains of religion, to put an end to the law. It's in 2 Corinthians 3 where Paul talks about how when Jesus was on the cross, he put an end to the ministration of death that had been written on stone tablets. The only stone tablets I know in the Bible were the ones the Ten Commandments were written on. He fulfilled the law and finished it. But because we like to be involved, because we want to be hands-on, people have decided that the law is better. No, it isn't. All I know to do, all I know to tell those people, if they're watching online or if they're in here, I'd love to introduce you to Jesus. See, my prayer as we've gone through this, and my prayer will continue to be probably long after this is done, is that we would know Jesus better and love him best. That's how we break free from all this religious nonsense that's been piled on to who Jesus is. I hope that the sermon tonight has been enlightening and educational. I hope and I pray that it has gone into deep soil where it'll take root, into good soil where it'll take root. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I'll say a prayer, benediction, and then a blessing. If you need prayer for anything, or you'd like us to come into agreement with you on anything in prayer, if you're online, you can always send a message to the church through our Facebook page. If you're here in person, I'm going to stay up here for a little bit. I would be absolutely delighted to agree with you in prayer on whatever's going on. Father, thank you so much for the time we've had together tonight. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for sending Jesus to die on the cross for us. I thank you, Father, for the freedom that you've given us, the freedom that we can continue to operate in, that we don't have to worry about what other people think when you're the one leading, guiding, and directing us. Because faith doesn't make rational sense, but it's the best way. Father, I thank you that we'd go from here being doers of the word and not hearers only. I thank you that as we go from here, we would look more like Jesus in all that we say and do and act and think, that we would know him better and love him best. Father, get us safely home and bring us safely back. I speak a blessing on all the people here and the people watching online in the 6 major areas of life: business, home, social, physical, mental, and spiritual. Pour out your love, your power, your grace, your spirit in such a mighty way that when the rest of the world sees them, they'll say, surely these people have been with Jesus. If you receive that, say amen. Wonderful, wonderful. Have a great rest of your week. No, I love you all terribly. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it. And we'll see you later.